For Thuma Media's Polity, I'm Sane Dlamini. Political analyst Aubrey Majiki discusses his column titled, "We Should Be Less Euphoric About Ramaphosa Moment." In your introduction, Aubrey, you sound like you are warning South Africans not to be too excited about President Ramaphosa's election last month. Why is that?
Well, I do think that the sense of optimism is not completely misplaced, given the fact that the years which I refer to as the Zuma moment were some of the darkest years in our history since 1994. It is a period during which, as a country, we lost moral authority, the state lost moral authority, and the relationship of trust between the state and citizens, or between citizens and those who govern, was completely compromised. And therefore, South Africans and many members of the ANC were looking for something different. We're looking for someone different who would represent values different from those the ANC under Jacob Zuma came to represent. While it is not misplaced, the sense of euphoria is, because the sense of euphoria does not take into account the challenges that the country faces, many of which will take a generation or two before we can say we have tackled them effectively. Ramaphosa as a president, at most, will be in office for 11 and a half years if the ANC wins the next two elections. And therefore must be realistic about what his government can achieve in the space of 11 and a half years. So all I'm calling for is for South Africans to look at the challenges we face and look at the period Ramaphosa is likely to be in office or will be in office, and compare the two realistically and see whether all the things we wish to happen in South Africa can happen in the space of 11 and a half years.
There are interesting questions that you are addressing, like the one that says, has SA entered another Mandela moment? Are we suffering from a strongman syndrome? And if Ramaphosa is a messiah, why are these questions important?
We suffer from a particular understanding of history. And this is not a uniquely South African problem. We tend to think that our salvation lies in the hands of powerful men who, on our behalf, will make history. So we had the Mandela moment, and we outsourced all our hopes and aspirations to Nelson Mandela. We also suffer from this idea of a strong man who will fix all the problems of the country. And now we're going through the phenomenon of a messiah in whose hands our salvation lies. And to some extent, it is unfair on Ramaphosa to pin such messianic hopes and aspirations on him, because we are setting him up for failure, because he will never live up to that expectation. And secondly, there is a very thin line, as you know, between love and hate. So we love him today because we've pinned all these expectations on him. We've pinned all these hopes on him. We will hate him tomorrow when he underperforms. And you will find that he has not underperformed objectively. He has underperformed only to the extent that we had these subjective hopes and aspirations we thought one man, Cyril Ramaphosa, can deal with.
In an interview with the public broadcaster, former SA President Jacob Zuma said he was a victim of counter-revolutionary and he took no responsibility whatsoever for the decline of the ANC as well as the country. Were you surprised about what he said?
No. I'm not saying Jacob Zuma is mad. I'm not saying that at all. But he caused me to go back to read a book I read some years ago, a book called The Madness of Kings. A book which, in essence, argues that many a leader suffers from a pathology which makes him or her not to have a full grasp of reality. So when I watched the interview former President Jacob Zuma did with the SABC on the day he resigned, to me, he came across as a person who did not have a full grasp of reality, or whose denial is so deep that he no longer had a sense of reality. So the point I'm making, as I say, I am not saying he is mad, but I think there is a pathology, I mean, leaders such as Jacob Zuma, Robert Mugabe, and others suffer from.
Why do you think the recent cabinet reshuffle by Ramaphosa doesn't betray his power but also limits that power?
For me, there is a powerful image I cannot take out of my mind when I think of the day Ramaphosa announced the cabinet reshuffle. The first thing you see when the camera goes to the holding office or holding room and the door opens is Ace Magashule stepping out of the holding room with a spring in his step. And to me, he looked like a man who got most of what he wanted. Then the camera goes back to the door of the holding room. The door is slightly ajar. You see a President, Cyril Ramaphosa, who looks quite sick. He steps out of the room. He looks haggard. He looks tired. He looks like a man who has just been quartered, hanged, and his heart taken out alive. He looks like a man who did not get what he wanted. And he makes the announcement. And the announcement betrays, as I say in the article, not his power, but the limits of that power. Now, of course, there is never, or it is seldom the case, that a head of state will appoint cabinet in conditions of his own choosing. A head of state will almost always have to make compromises between what he wants and what others want, including his party and powerful interests in society. So he has to do that balancing act between what he wants in relation to his own legacy, what others want, what the party wants, what big business wants, what the markets want, what the poor want, what the working class want. But also he has created expectations that he's going to fix the problem of corruption, state capture, rent-seeking, and so on. But the party imposes appointments on him which contradict that message. For instance, he has to retain ministers such as Malusi Gigaba when the perception is that Malusi Gigaba is the face of state capture, or one of the faces of state capture. Objectively, he may not be, but subjectively, that's the perception. And subjectively, Ramaphosa has created the perception that he will deal with problems such as state capture. And then he appoints Bathabile Dlamini as Minister for the Women's Ministry in the President's office. And you wonder what message he's sending about gender equality when he appoints an individual who, in my view, represents patriarchy in a dress. That appointment is a slap in the face to the women of this country. But I think it's an appointment, again, that was imposed on him by the party and the balance of forces inside the party. The same applies to the appointment of Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma as Minister in charge of evaluation and monitoring in the office of the President. So it's very clear to me that the reason Ace Magashule steps out of the holding room with a spring in his step is because the party, through him, or partly through him, was able to impose appointments on the President of the Republic that the President of the Republic would rather not have made.
Do you think Didi Mabuza's appointment was also imposed on him?
Well, the moment Didi Mabuza was elected ANC deputy president, the ANC was always going to have a problem if it decided he was not going to be the deputy president of the country. In my view, it was a mistake for Ramaphosa to accept deployment as president of the republic, because he runs the risk of his limitations, if there are any, coming to the fore before the 2019 elections, and therefore having some impact on the electoral fortunes of the ANC. In my view, what Ramaphosa should do, actually, to obviate such a problem, is to call for an early election. So in my view, the election must happen in 2018, not 2019, for tactical reasons. And to deepen the crisis of opposition parties such as the EFF and the Democratic Alliance, who at the moment are at 6s and 7s, because with Jacob Zuma as president of the ANC in the country, their task was not as difficult as it is going to be in the next election, because it's quite possible that what was going to happen, that is the possibility that the ANC would lose power in 2019, is now not going to happen. And therefore my prognosis now is that the ANC under Cyril Ramaphosa will retain power in 2019, even if it suffers some electoral losses, in some provinces, even deep electoral losses. On the other hand, his appointment may have been a masterstroke, in the sense that President Jacob Zuma caused too much damage to the image of the ANC. Whereas with the election of Ramaphosa, the ANC will benefit from the collateral beauty that will come with the Ramaphosa presidency. So having deployed Ramaphosa as interim president, it was unavoidable that Didi Mabuza would have to be deployed as interim deputy president. But that too does not send a very good message, given the fact that there is a cloud of suspicion and allegations that hangs above Didi Mabuza's head.
And finally, Aubrey, you want President Ramaphosa not to turn this euphoria into a weapon against remembering and becoming numb to the ravages of apartheid colonialism. What does this mean?
Well, people commend him, praise him a lot. They extol his virtues as a skilled negotiator. As I've said elsewhere, I personally still have not decided whether in Ramaphosa you are dealing with a skilled negotiator or a serial compromiser, or both. Now, if we are in part dealing with a serial compromiser, appeasement is going to be part of Ramaphosa's legacy. The question is, which powerful interests is he going to appease, and which interests is he going to alienate? As you know, when money talks, people mumble. And therefore, there is always the possibility that when he is faced with demands from powerful interests in the economy, and these demands are in conflict with or in competition with the demands of the poor and the working class, he will mumble. And therefore, what I'm saying is that he must not mumble.
That was political analyst Aubrey Majiki speaking to Crema Media's Polity about his latest column titled, "We Should Be Less Euphoric About Ramaphosa Moment."